Well, hello. Thank you very much to come to this session. We called Sabotage Your Viz, the art of Tableau mistakes. We are really glad to have you here rather than at Tristan's presentation. It's a big concurrence. We would love to thank you for being here, and also we would love to thank Tableau for making this event possible and allowing us to speak to you today.
Yeah, it's an honor for us that you all chose to give us a little bit of your time. We'll try to make it worth.
So, do we have any complete beginners in the room? Okay.
OK, so quite a few. If you are a beginner with Tableau, you've got a pretty long journey ahead. You must be aware of it. And we do want you to know that you're going to fail sometimes. If you're not a beginner, I'm pretty sure, and you can even raise your hand if you do, that you have a huge list of bad decisions that you've made, of wrong calculation that you built, of data models that got completely broken. And the whole goal of this session is to try, of course, it's not going to be an exhaustive list, but the whole goal of this session is to try to present you some things that we wish we would have understood a little bit earlier than we actually did.
Yeah. Well, we are Maxime and Simon. We are two analytics consultants. We've been working with Tableau for almost 10 years. What we do is provide coaching, mentorship, animate trainings, and develop data analysis projects.
Yeah, and you may feel it. We are also pretty good friends. We are hanging out, hiking around the world together, doing a lot of adventures. But if we stick to the work, most of the time our customers, they do call us to fix things. They ask us to repair some broken workbooks, and they ask us with questions like, why isn't that working? Why is this too slow? Sometimes just, why? And so the whole goal for us is to be able to answer them, and we are able to do that because we failed before them. We learned how to fix things the hard way, and hopefully we'll try to have you spend a little less time than we did.
Yeah. Well, as Maxime said, our relationship started with Tableau, actually. We worked in the same company, ActinVision, for 1 year. And our relationship is beyond the hiking, the sports, etc., is around data and data prep, and mainly about solving problems. So these are a few ones that we had to solve and how you can avoid the mistakes we did.
So the good thing is you can sabotage your project at many levels. You can break your calculations, you can break your data model, you can break your Vs, and many more. As I said, non-exhaustive list. We'll try to focus on some things that we encountered at the very beginning of our journey and try to expand it and go dive into more and more complex things. Hopefully, we'll have a little bit of time at the end to raise questions also. So if you want to expand any kind of subject, we'll try to ask Adam to run with a microphone.
Yeah. Well, let's start with how to sabotage your vizzes. At first, when we started using Tableau with Maxime, we thought it was simple. You just get your data, you connect to it, and create vizzes. That was the beginning of our Tableau journey. But we learned the hard way along the path. So that was Maxime and I in 2019. And now we learned a few things about vizzes. Mainly that with Tableau, you can do pretty much anything, but you can also do too much. You can see here on the dashboard that you have lots of things shown, including inventory data, orders data, CRM data, lots of infos, various KPIs, a little bit too much maybe. Let's see how that applies in Tableau. So here we have the same dashboard with lots of info again. Hard to find any insights in it. So a better way to display this would be to separate it in several dashboards first. So we have an inventory data dashboard. We have a little bit less viz in the same dashboard to declutter it and to understand it a little bit better. We have the same for the orders, etc., etc. So this is a first advice at the dashboard level. Try to keep it simple. After that, if it lets me click. After that, we also learned one very important rule along the path around the various vizzes building. The golden rule, which is one viz, one purpose. The goal is to try to answer the question with only one viz, so it is clear and really easy to grasp the info in it. So let's see how this works in reality. At first, let's talk about the data set. So we found out recently that we were working for both companies that sell and order fish. And yeah, so the data set that we use here is all around fish. So inventory of fish we have, orders of these fish, CRM around it, etc., etc.
Yeah, so we basically help two competitors to analyze their data better than the other.
So they are at their in this use case, they are at their very beginning of the Tableau journey. They have along in front of them. So they have pretty basic questions for the moment. Let's see some of those. So they asked us what are our top products. On the left side, you can see that the first thing we could have done during our Tableau journey was to show some fancy radar chart. Fancy charts, nice for the adoption, because people go, wow, that's Tableau, wow, that's nice. But the thing is here, we can't properly answer the question, because we need a table next to it to have the exact amount displaying. And so the fancy radar chart is not really giving us any info rather than just the wow. So maybe a simpler way would be just to use a simple bar chart showing the margin per product. And this way we can show either for the fresh, frozen, or total number of products how our products are doing.
Yeah, if you do need a table to give you the results, then your chart is pointless, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the one viz, one purpose golden rule wasn't used, so it's no longer relevant to have the fancy radar chart. Here's the second example. The second question was, how does our best commercial do his business? In here, on the left side, you can see that we have multiple bar charts to display this key info. The thing is that you will spend more than 3 seconds to understand at first those charts. And as a consequence, you won't be able to get the info really quickly. So one better way to display this would be to use Tableau's interactivity. On the right side, you can see that we have a drill down bar chart that allows you to drill from the commercial to the sector to the type of selling points and finally to the product names. And this way, your users are able to grasp the info really quickly. Finally, they had a third question, which was, what is our inventory's product distribution? Back in the past, when we started our Tableau journey again, we wanted to answer every single question at the same place. On the left side, you can see that we have a line chart showing the distribution of the products, but also in time. So the thing is that if you see at the bottom, you have lots of different products, but they are really close to each other, so you can't really see the exact numbers. And the issue here that we have is that we try to answer several questions at once. So to answer this question, it would be best to show this fancy sunburst showing the exact inventory distribution. So in fact, this golden rule works also both ways. One viz, one purpose, but one question, one viz only. Well, once you have done this job of choosing which type of viz you will use for your various questions, it is best to stick with it. If you are consistent with your viz choices, you are pretty sure that the analysis in the end will be faster and that the adoption it will be better because your users know exactly what to expect when they land on your dashboards. Also, you've spent a lot of time designing your dashboards, doing some data prep, maybe understanding your the business needs, etc., etc. So don't start over when you have new questions, when you have new business needs. It's better to start with from what you already have. So it can be time for redesign whenever you have new questions and you are no longer aligned with your business needs. Also, sorry, before that, also another thing is that if you redesign your dashboards, you're pretty sure that you will find out that you have several times the same KPIs in different dashboards. So this is a way also to gather everything at the same point, and so your users aren't wandering all over the Tableau server or Tableau cloud to find one key info. And one tool we found out with Maxime was really great for the redesign purpose was the mind map. The mind map allows you to list the different vises and KPIs you have, and in the end, analyze what is useful, what are your targets, and the impact of these contents. And this way, you are able to repurpose your dashboards, answer to the new questions, and make sure that your redesign is efficient. One key benefit some key benefits and best practices are written on the slide, and in the end, if we have to summarize it, it would be that it allows you to simplify and optimize the existing dashboards you have by repurposing them, maybe, and redesigning those that you have already. And always, during this whole process, you should keep in mind the why. Why did we choose this type of viz? Why did we choose to answer to this question with this data? And with this, you are pretty much guaranteed that at the viz level, you won't sabotage your vises. Well, if only your calculations worked.
Yeah, talking about those calculations, I'm going to present you 3 calculation errors I've made at the very beginning of my journey. So I'm going to start with very simple things, but things I wish I would have got way earlier than I actually did, and things that I kind of understood the right way. How can I start with something else than this one? Cannot mix aggregate and non-aggregate arguments with this function. Pretty sure 100% of the people here that have opened Tableau Desktop, I'm pretty sure 100% of the people inside this room have seen this message. So let's try to understand what Tableau does and why this error message appears. I'm going to consider very simple data sets, 3 products, some turnover, some volume, and I'm going to try to expand it to add a new calculation that is going to be my price per kilogram, right? So basically taking my turnover, dividing it by the volume, and trying to just enhance my Vs. The thing is, with Tableau, if we try to make it simple, we've got 2 kinds of calculations we can write. We've got the row level calculations, and we've got the aggregated calculations. Those 2 are executed in 2 different times. Why? The row level calculation that you see in pink here, this is taken into consideration by Tableau at the exact same time that it's reading the data, right? It's exactly a very simple thing. Tableau is just basically creating a new column here, writing down the data based on a formula as you would do in an Excel spreadsheet, just clicking in a cell and typing equal my formula, blah, 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 dragging down all the formula, and I'm just basically creating a new column. When I work with something that is aggregated instead, what Tableau does is that, of course, it reads the data, but then it aggregates it to a new level, a general level. So this calculation is going to be evaluated for each row of my data set, while the aggregated one is going to be dynamic in a sense that Tableau is going to give me a result that is going to be different depending on which kind of detail I want to display. We can see, if we take a look at the total, that, of course, it behaves in 2 different ways, and that's basically because of what Tableau does. So if we take a step back and we think about the Tableau's mission, Tableau is helping us see and understand our data. And how does it do that? Well, it basically helps us to take billion of rows and to get a general result, which is an aggregation, a sum, a global result. And then it helps us to identify trends, get into details, and go further and further with this deep dive within our data sets. So that doesn't tell me when this message appears. Let's go a little bit further and say that, yes, I've got my price per kilogram, but I want to make it a little bit more complex because I've got some external suppliers within my shop, and I need to pay back a fee for the turnover that I make with them. So I'm going to get back my aggregated calculation, basically sum of turnover divided by sum of volume, and I'm going to try to make it more complex. What I'm tempted to write is something like this, saying, well, if my supplier type is an external one, then I want to decrease my turnover by 10%, so 0.9 times my turnover. In every other case, I keep my standard turnover, and I divide that by the sum of the volume. This is a calculation that is using 2 types of calculations that are executed in 2 different times. This is executed for each row of my data at the same time that Tableau reads it, and this is an aggregated calculation that Tableau does afterwards. And therefore, Tableau tells me, man, that cannot work, to which I reply a face like this. Thank you. So going a little bit further, why it cannot do that? I mean, if we take a look at this, not even us as human, we also can't do that. We don't know how to proceed. We've got one calculation in pink that has many different values, and the aggregated one that is just giving us an aggregated result, which is basically relying on the level of detail that we are displaying. So how do we solve this? Again, starting again with my price per kilogram, my sum of turnover divided by my sum of volume. If I get more into a real case scenario, what I'm tempted to write is something like that, which is basically a calculated field that is going to say, if my supplier type is equal to my external suppliers, I want to decrease my price per kilogram. Again, same error message that is going to be triggered because this is executed for each row of my data. It's a row level calculation, while this is an aggregated one. So Tableau again tells me you cannot mix aggregates and non-aggregates. And if we go a little bit further, I've seen thousands of people writing such a calculation. If you did, and if you do not see how this is wrong, well, I hope that at the end of this session you will. This is an attempt to make this calculation work. You can see that it's valid. And what we've done is that instead of having the row level condition that was supplier type equal to external, we aggregated the supplier type. And we used a function that is called attr to do that, which is basically the default aggregation that Tableau provides for texts, and which is the one I hate the most, I would say. So instead of writing that, what I would advise you is to combine row-level data calculation with aggregations, right? So within a sum, that is the one that you see right here, within this sum, I'm writing inside the sum the row-level calculation that I want, which is giving back 10% of my turnover. And then this sum I divide with the sum of the volume. And therefore, I'm going to have a calculation that is going to work at every single level. So don't try to use attr at home, and please write something that looks like this. Which lets me introduce you the worst function ever. As I said, attr, attributes. That's something that Tableau gives us every time we try to aggregate some text elements, some text dimensions within our data source. And the way it works, if you don't know it, the way it works is that Tableau is going to read our data, calculate the minimum value of this text field, right? So it's going to scan the whole data, get the minimum value. It's going to get the maximum value. Then it's going to compare those two values. And if the minimum is equal to the maximum, that means I have only one value. It's going to give me the result. If I have several values within my data source, what it's going to give me is a fancy-looking star that doesn't give me any insight and that I cannot even use within a calculation. If you write attr equals star, doesn't work. It's going to break. That's why you should never use this function. So it's absolutely not performant at all because it's calculating many things, and it just basically provides no insights. So let me show you how bad this is. Again, I'm going to focus on something very simple. I have my 3 products. I have then, as a second dimension here, my supplier type. So I can see that I've got external suppliers, in-house suppliers, and we find the 3 last calculations that we worked on. Price per kilogram, the general one, turnover divided by volume. Sum of turnover divided by sum of volume. Then the one with the attr, and the one with the sum and the if inside. If we take a look at the detail level, of course, everything works. We can see that there is absolutely no difference between those 2 columns. But as soon as I will aggregate my supplier type and go down to the attribute, I'm going to find back this fancy star. And what I'm going to notice is that now my attr is equal to the general calculation I've made. What's going on here? Well, within the calculation, I'm saying if my attr of my supplier type is equal to external, I want to decrease my turnover. But it's never equal to the external. It's always equal to this star that I cannot even evaluate. In the meantime, the calculation that's working with the sum and the if inside, this one is still working, and it will always. So please never write attr. There is always a better solution. Moving with a third one type of calculation, I just want to highlight one quick thing about nested calculations. If you do some research within the internet about how to optimize your Tableau performances, you may find that nested calculations is something that can break your performances. I just want to balance it out, add a little bit of nuance, and just tell you that, yes, if you have a calculation that calls another calculation that calls another calculation, of course, it's going to decrease your performances. But we also need to look at things in a maintenance way and just evaluate how easy it's going to be to maintain your file and to make it evolve. So let's just consider something like this again. So what I've got here is a bug. Nice one. So I've got here a parameter that is allowing me to select a month that I want to evaluate. And I want to focus on this month. And I've got a second parameter that is allowing me to either look at the monthly data or the year-to-date data. Now, this is the selected period. And I have the exact same thing that is giving me the prior year. So I'm basically going to do an analysis that is going to compare my actual versus last year. If, like me, you end up building a calculation that is not working at all. And for me, that's also a good practice that you can have. All my calculation, they always start with an underscore. That's helping me a lot because I can find back all my calculation very easily. And as soon as I'm creating a calculated field, if I want one calculation, I just type underscore and I can see everything. If I need to correct those calculations, if I nest my operations, meaning the fact that I create first something called selected period comparison, so evaluating the period last year. If I need to correct this, it's going to be very easy. I can just do one change to my calculation, and I'm going to then, in cascade, fix all my calculations because they are all either using the selected period and grabbing the quantity, either using the comparison here. And if I'm within the comparison period, then I take my discounts, for example. I would always advise you to use nested calculations for period filtering, because then I can very easily add a new strategy saying I want to compare with the last rolling 12 months, or I can just fix the way I'm doing my calculations. Many of my customers actually work with calculations that are built this way, where it actually starts within all the date filtering is everywhere in every single if calculation. So this is repeated into all of those calculations. If I need to make one change, I need to adapt and adjust all those fields. If I do use the nested ones, I just need to change that, and it's going to work way better. So yeah, too much time spent on this subject. Please use the nested calculation, Wesley. Which leads me back to you.
Yeah, well, if only my data was in a single data source. Well, let's see a pretty old-school sabotage. We've seen the sabotages around your viz, around your calculation, and let's see now how you can sabotage also during the analysis when you create your vizzes. Well, let's see this good old sabotage called data blending. Maybe, Max, can you remind us what a data blending is, please?
Do we have some people that actually know data blending here? I'm pretty sure there are some, but yeah. It's a nightmare, right? Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. If you don't know it, it's just an old-fashioned way that we had to use data coming from two different data sets that usually were at two different levels of details. For example, I've got a daily sales data set that I want to compare to my monthly targets. Basic example, back in time before 2020, we were kind of forced to use this because we couldn't use the data model within Tableau because we didn't have the relationships, so we had to perform only joins, and the joins had a huge issue because as soon as you do a join between two tables that are not at the same level, then the most aggregated one gets repeated and duplicated all the way. So basically breaks everything. You need to write fixed calculation. It's also a nightmare in terms of performances.
Yeah, right. Well, this monstrosity still exists, and maybe can you explain us in which cases?
Yeah, the reason why we talk about that is because there is a population that is quite often left aside, and they do have a license, they cannot create data sources, and they are stuck to use only the published data source that they've got. These people are explorers. And so if you have an Explorer license, the only access that you got is a Tableau Cloud one. You basically can connect to every single existing data source. But if your data source doesn't contain all the data that you need, And if your KPI is supposed to use two different numbers that are in two different data sources, the only thing you can do is to have your workbook connected to two different data sources at the same time, and within each worksheet, define the link that you want between those two data sources and grab your aggregated data.
Yeah, well, and this is the best way actually to lose your explorers adoption. And by leaving them without any support and on their own, this is how you can absolutely sabotage your explorer's experience. Well, as Maxime said, in fact, the sabotage around this data blending is that you have to define within every single sheet the relationship that you will have to do between the two published data sources, or sources, not published yet, but between your different sources. And you'll have to choose the primary source carefully, because this one will have the level of detail that you will bring, and the other ones, the secondaries, won't have the same level of detail. So if they are if they have a thinner level of detail, they will be aggregated, and hence you will lose some info maybe. And also, in terms of performance, it is not very great, because you will have some temporary files created by Tableau to operate this data blending. And you probably will end with lots of ATTRs, which will not be pleasant for Maxime.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave the room if I said that.
So in the end,
I don't want that.
In the end, we have a great responsibility around this, because we need to create the right data sources as simple as possible, but also tailored to the needs of our explorers in order to make their life easier. And also, one solution in the future, because there is a brighter future probably in front of us, we heard about the composable data sources that would allow us to join our relationship to different published data sources, which would be great. And if it's available for explorers, that would be great too, because they would have a solution.
Yeah, we are basically going to be able to build data relationships between published data sources. Not sure if the explorers will have the right to actually build those data sources, so that may not fix the issue. Yeah, most probably they won't be able to. And of course, yeah, you can work with the composable data source, but you need then to know how the relationships are working. I will not get into details of this, because if I would start to talk about relationships, that can be a whole 40-minute session. But let's get back to a very simple example here. I've got, again, my parameter that is allowing me to select the month of October. And I've got within my data some selected turnover and some turnover targets that I want to be compared with. Here, what I can see is that I'm pretty much behind my turnover, which is another thing to dig into, maybe related to business. But as I know my data, I know we are pretty far from the target, but I also know that my target is not 1 million at all. So there is an issue with this calculation, and we are going to try to find out what's happening here. First, what I'm going to do is to click here, Worksheet, and I'm going to check out my data model. So it's a very simple one. I've got two tables that are linked together using the so-called relationship. That is great, because it helps us to have data models that are using tables that are defined at different level of aggregation. I can have my daily or product level sales order, and I can have my monthly defined on the species targets, for example, two different levels. And Tableau is now querying those two dynamically, giving me aggregated results and making sure that it preserves every single KPI. So this is a great model, and that's one of the best things with Tableau, I would say. Now, if I go to my data source, and if I try to give you a little bit more understanding about how my data is built, if I take a look at my orders, I can see that it's on a monthly level. It's defined for all the single products that I've got. Every single product is grouped into species. I've got my turnover associated, and I can verify also that my parameter is working, right? My selected period, I've got my value. Outside of the selected period, I have a null. If I take a look at my targets, it's way more general. I have only one monthly value that is associated to a species, but I do not go down to the product. That would be a huge work for the commercial team. They are just working based on the species. So what's happening here, if I try to find out why I've got 1 million here displayed, I'm going to get a little bit more detail, right? So let's get the species, let's get the products, And if I take a look at this big table, I can see that, of course, I'm at a very detailed level. So what I can see is that my target, which is normal, is repeated in every single row, right? For every species, every month, I've got my target repeated everywhere. And if I go try to investigate with Tableau, that is something that Tableau really makes the difference with this. I can select my values, and within the tooltip, so I'm sorry you won't be able to read that, but within the tooltip, we can see that I find back my million value here. And this is absolutely not what I want, because my target should not be the sum of all those selected values. It should be one value for each month and every species, right? So those 3 values, actually, and not the whole sum that is displayed within this table. So my target should be 484,000 and not a million. So let's try to understand what's going on here. If I take a look at my 2 calculated fields, they are there. And from what I can see, if I open the calculation, they are very simple. If I'm within the month of order date, and if it's equal to my parameter, then I grab the turnover. If I open the target one, it's exactly the same. If I'm within my order date, and if this order date is equal to my parameter, then I take my targets. No error message. Tableau tells me nothing, and doesn't tell me why it's wrong. So let's go a little bit further. Can we identify a difference between those 2 calculations? There is one. It's thin, but there is one. Here, if I take a look at my calculation, the selected turnover, it's very well organized within the orders table. If I take a look at the selected turnover target, it's below, somewhere outside of the target table. What does it tell me? Well, here, if I take a look at my selected target, this is the date that comes from the order table. This is a target that comes from the target table. This is not aggregated at all. That's a row level calculation. So that means Tableau is trying to create a new column with those values. How does it do that? Well, it has to link and join the 2 tables together in order to evaluate these results. So it's first joining the 2 tables together, and therefore it's repeating the targets everywhere. So what do we want? Well, every time we are working with a row level data calculation, what we need to do is to make sure that it's well organized within its table. So this has to somehow appear here. And in order to make this work, what I need to do is simply consider the right date. Within this calculation, instead of saying if the month of order date is equal to the parameter, what I need is to take into consideration the month of targets. Therefore, my calculation only uses columns that are coming from one single table, which is the target one. And if I click apply here, I will see that I fixed my values. So every time you work with a row level data calculation, what you need to make sure that you're doing is that your calculation is using only data coming from one single table. And of course, if then you need to go a little bit further with that, you can aggregate that. You can make any kind of calculation that is comparing data from all the different tables, but this has to be aggregated.
Yeah, well, if only relationships could solve all of my data model issues. Let's see again with our fish company an example of how relationships cannot always solve all of your problems. So here we will be dealing with this question. Is my inventory level coherent with my sales volume? So let's see if we try to answer this question with relationships. So let's see the data model in here, how our orders and inventories are linked. So on the left side, you can see that we have the orders linked to the inventory with the product ID and the order date, and we just added the product table in order to have the product name readable for our users. So the thing is that here within our data viz, you will see that we have a little issue. Here you can see on the left side that we have our volume displaying properly and inventory level on the right. However, we have just a few inventory levels showing. We have lots of nulls here. Why is that? Well, let's see. Let's have a look at the order date the date we are using. And actually, it is the order date, which is linked directly to the orders and not to the inventory. In our company, in this example, and in their market, some orders may happen whenever there isn't an inventory, and also all the way around. There can be an inventory, but no orders at a specific date. So as a consequence, as we are using here the order date, we may have some inventory levels that are not matching the dates. So we have some nulls here for the month of order date, and some nulls also for the product name. Well, we would have a solution with one of Tableau features, which is pretty recent, the multi-fact tables. In fact, if we have a look at the data model, we can see that we have both inventory and orders on the left side being two fact tables, so multi-fact tables, that are directly linked to the dates and products, which are the stitching dimensions, the stitching tables. This way, we make sure that every single date is linked to every single inventory and orders, and at the same time, the products are linked to the inventory and to the orders. Let's see how this does in our data viz. So we can see that we pretty much solved our problem. Here we can see on the left the volume, which is still OK, and we can see that our inventory level now matches every single date, so here the different months, and also every single product. The thing is that if we dig deeper, you can see that we have here on the row shelf the date that comes from the dates table and the product name that comes from the products table. And you can see the stitching tables and the stitching dimensions directly in the row shelf here with this little symbol, showing that you stitched the inventories and orders, with the dates and products. The thing is that, as we said earlier, the company we are working with is at its debuts with Tableau and with data in general terms. So they don't have lots of SQL knowledge. So the thing is that if we have to explain them how to use this, it may be a little bit tedious, and also they may have some issues with the calculations and when creating their data viz, because they don't grasp the whole picture that goes with it. So one solution that we found out with Maxime was actually to use something we called a referential. Well, that is called a referential. Let's see how this works. So we created a dates and products referential that joins every single date with every single product using a one-to-one join, meaning that every single date that we have in our calendar table and every single product that we have in our calendar table will be in this referential. So in the end, we will have every single date and every single product that then can be linked directly to the inventory and to the orders, meaning that we will have always a correspondence between our dates, our inventory, and our orders. And in the end, how it translates in our data viz is that we have the correct volume and the correct inventory level, but at the same time, our users that are pretty beginners won't have to hassle with the stitching tables and stitching dimensions. They can create their calculations and their data viz just as they would with a simple data source.
Yeah, and if only we had more time to talk about all of those. Yeah, so just to summarize it up, with this huge issue that we have with the orders and the inventories, if we stick with standard dimensions, it's going to be bad. We are going to have to make a choice. Either we stick with the date that comes from the orders and we may not have an inventory. Either we take the inventory, we may not have an order corresponding. We are going to have mismatch everywhere. The multi-fact, great, but complex, and also defined in every single worksheet because, well, it depends on which shared dimension you use, and you need to be extremely careful. So yeah, this thing of having a referential that is creating all the different combinations between the products and the dates that you are going to use as a root and then plug onto that your inventories on one side and your orders on the other one is going to be a little bit more efficient, a little bit more performant, and it's going to work well. So before we wrap it up, just very quickly, because we are running out of time, some other sabotages, but those are things that we identified recently. And I do want to talk a little bit about having a development frame. With the time and with the scaling of your data usage, as soon as you are going to use more and more Tableau workbooks, more and more KPIs, more and more users, would they be creators, explorers, or viewers, you're going to have to think about how do you scale and how do you make things, let's say, adopted and maintained. If we take a look at the creator view, when you will need to create data sources, calculated fields, vises, and everything, it's very important to think about the process and think about how do you do things. You do want to have naming conventions for all your calculated fields so that if one developer is giving some work to another one, then everyone knows how do we handle the periods, what kind of parameters do we use, how do we find all the calculated fields, do we have some specific, I don't know, fiscal dates we work with, and how are those calculated? You do want to have naming conventions to make it easier for the developers to switch from one project to another. The other thing that is quite often forgotten is to standardize your visuals. Tableau is a great tool. We can basically create any kind of visuals with it. But you want your viewer not to be lost, and you want them to adopt one new data analysis that you're providing easily. How do we do that? Basically, we identify the kind of business needs that we answer with our vises, right? If I do have a vise that works well to do some benchmarks and to compare my actuals with a simple bar chart to my prior year, and if I do have one chart that works well, I want to reuse this technique and this chart to every single workbook and dashboard that I've made. Every time I'm going to have a comparison with the prior year, it's always going to use the same color, it's going to be using the same kind of reference line, it's going to be built the same way. If I do that, as soon as I'm releasing a new dashboard to a new viewer, this person may not even be aware about what the dashboard talks about, but this person is going to find a chart that he or she knows. And therefore, they are going to adapt this way faster because they will find some objects that looks familiar.
Yeah. Well, and let's see also some recent governance pitfalls that we fell in. Actually, it's very important to lead your creators. You shouldn't let them do whatever they want, especially with flat files. Define some ingestion and connection processes. This way you make sure that at any point the flat files that the users need are integrated in your data sources, but also it is easy for anyone to refresh it and to make sure that it is properly processed.
Yeah, and there are many ways to do that. You can decide to have this on a storage, like a OneDrive, Google Drive. You can also have a process to ingest things into data warehouse, which we would always advise. There are many ways to do that, but don't let them alone connect to their files without having a standard process defined.
Yeah, and the same goes for the schedules. Make sure that every single schedule is not randomly picked, but that you use either for Tableau Cloud the admin insights that will help you build the correct schedule timetable, and or when you use Tableau Server, that you use the Tableau Server repository, which will help you analyze when is it best, to schedule your different refreshes. And this way, you make sure that you have no unnecessary load on the user access time frame. Also, in order to make life easier for your explorers and creators, make sure, and also viewers, by the way, make sure that you have certified data sources. This way you know, or your users know, that they have all the calcs they need within the data source, that you integrated their flat files, and also that they have renamed fields that they can relate to.
Yeah, we tend to create tailored data source for creators so that they can build their own data source that is tailored to their need, tailored to their dashboards. But if we talk about the explorers, sometimes I tend to replicate my data somewhere else and to have one data source that is meant only for the explorers, because I can prepare some calculated fields with understandable names, aggregation already done, a lot of columns that are hidden because they won't need those. I try to make it simple with them. We're going ahead of time, but let's talk briefly about KPI accessibility, which is one of the main topics I address these days. With the time and with all the dashboards that you're going to create, you may end up having KPIs spread out everywhere. And you may end up having some viewers every single Monday morning opening 3-4 different workbooks just to get infos on different spots. What you want is to have a review process on a regular basis. It could be quarterly, it could be biannual, as you want, but you want to make sure that you see what the viewers are consulting and when, and to be sure that you provide them solutions that are making them able to have all the answers they need on a regular basis in one single screen, maybe 2 sheets, but you don't want them to open 4 workbooks at a time.
Yeah, so to wrap it up, just let us see a few key takeaways. You should rationalize, so make sure that you use the golden rule, one viz, one purpose, maintain KPI accessibility, as you just said, and make sure also to prevent dashboard obsolescence by redesigning every workbook that needs some new, to answer some new questions, or that needs to meet some new business needs.
Yeah, I'm going to be quick, but yeah, fear the role-level calculations. Make sure that they are well organized within their own tables. Don't use STTR. Use naming conventions, and don't repeat all your period filtering within every single calculations.
Yeah, and invest in data prep and data modeling. Make sure that you tailor your data sources to your business needs, so for your creators, your explorers, and your viewers, and make sure also that you certify your data so that they know that they have everything they need in it.
I think that's all for us, right?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Second, thank you.